We're going to talk about data culture 2.0. What does that mean? It means that Gen AI has entered the chat. And so with that, we're going to talk about, well, how do you leverage, right, AI to build human connections and expand your influence? It's very meta, but come with us on this journey. It's clicker not working. Okay. Before we get started, a little bit about us, because you're probably sitting there going, well, who are you? I'm Celina Wong. I am currently the CEO of Data Culture. Data Culture is a data consultancy based in New York. So as you can imagine, data engineering and analytics. We also do data visualization. So that's also a part of our consultancy. I've been head of data 3 times now. Yes, I've done it 3 times over. And 2 out of the 3 times have successfully exited. So my last exit was actually to one of the biggest companies on this planet. And so I must be doing something right along the way. And over my career, I've spent 15 years across being both a data practitioner as well as a business stakeholder. So I have this unique perspective of, I've seen both sides of this coin. And I've also seen the friction, right, of what it means to be a data practitioner as well as a business stakeholder, where I once was the person asking you for, can I just get a quick data pull, and then waiting for days for that to happen. So I have this perspective of understanding, well, how do we think about bridging this gap and getting you there faster as data practitioners?
Cool. And I'm Samantha, a senior analytics engineer at Data Culture. And I actually have a background in mechanical engineering, but somewhere along the way in my education and my career path, I realized that I wanted to make the switch over as a data practitioner. And I'm really excited about this talk because I think very early on in my days at Data Culture, I realized how important it is to be able to have that influence and to be able to work with your business leaders to be able to actually build data stacks that are meaningful and have an impact.
And with that, let's dive right in. So everywhere you look nowadays, everywhere you turn, right? The headlines, when you just literally Google the words AI, what's the dire message it's telling all of us, right, at this point, ad nauseum, that AI is going to replace you one day. And we all know that in reality right now, it is far from it right now. Where before ChatGPT entered the scene, this was probably you, stick figure person, right? Trying to code for 2 hours and then debugging for 6 hours. And then after ChatGPT, you are, ChatGPT's spitting out something to you in 5 minutes. And then there you are again, pulling your hair out, but this time debugging for 24 hours later, right? And so we are far from that point. But all kidding aside, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take it seriously and consider this. I don't know Santiago, but he has a point here, that AI will not replace you, and you've heard this theme consistently, right? It won't replace you, but a person using AI will, right? And so how do we think about and how do we help you become this person, right? This person that's using AI. Many of the content and the talks that you hear at this conference and beyond, anywhere you go, it talks a lot about how do you leverage Copilot, right, as you're coding. It talks about, well, how do you build the, next latest and greatest AI products. All fantastic and phenomenal talks that I have attended and will attend as well. But then what you're hearing and emerging in these conversations is also the concept around, well, great, we have all these tools floating in the sea, right? But how do you actually make an impact on your organization, right? How are you actually driving influence and being seen as a data leader? Well, what if I told you that you can also use ChatGPT to build data culture and influence? I'm sure you're guessing or saying, tell me more. Ask and you shall receive. We're going to dive into 3 things today, and they're going to be tactical things, right? Because when you hear the words influence, data culture, you're like, great, those are all words, but but give me something to work with so that I can walk out of this room and actually start building towards that. And so the first thing is we're going to show you how can you leverage, AI, ChatGPT here, to start to hone in and pinpoint in on those metrics and hypothesize what are the key areas of your business that you should focus on, right? Some of the talks earlier today were talking just about this, where you're spending time on things where the business may think it may not matter. So how do you start to hone in on, well, what are the things that could matter? What are the metrics if you don't know them for your business? What are they for your business? And even ChatGPT tells you this at the very end when you prompt it for an answer. It says, please go and validate this, right? So number 2 is all around, well, you're on this journey, you're in ChatGPT or whatever your tool of choice is, and how do you think about, well, how am I going to go validate that these are actually things that are priorities for the business, right? Just because ChatGPT told you so, or you have an inkling, or you go and Google search something and it says so, doesn't necessarily mean that it's important to your business and your business's needs. So we'll walk through a bit of like, how would you go about validating what your findings are and ensure that that is what's important for your business. And along the way, as you're having those conversations with stakeholders, what does that mean to build, trust and influence with them? And last but not least, when you think about all of that, we also are digging into, well, what does it mean to shift your mindset into acting and thinking like an owner of the business and not just the data stack? So to set the stage of where you are today and why you're probably sitting in this room or coming to these conferences and thinking about this, you look into the lives of us, the day in the life of us as data practitioners, and the expectation of what you wanted out of this job or role that you've entered, right? You thought, I'm going to come in, I'm going to build some great data products, I've built some pipelines into some real-time dashboards, and I am winning, right? And that you're driving business value, you're driving impact, and you're probably one of these people getting and giving high fives back and forth because you're driving value. When in fact, in reality, you're probably feeling quite lonely and stuck in this lonely battle, right, of trying to do these things that you're being told, which is, let me go democratize data, and yet the business is saying to you, can I just get that quick data pull? And more importantly, what's happening behind the scenes is that you're not invited to those conversations when they're making decisions, right? Like, you're always an afterthought versus, oh, did you think to bring the data team in this discussion when we're thinking about a new initiative, right? You're always the last to know, or close to the last to know. Why is that? Why, you ask? It's because of a lack of data culture. It's a lack of your influence in the business. Just remember that. Think about that. Because that's why you're, almost the last to know about something happening. Now, Celina, I know, you talked about data culture. This track is all about data culture. And I know that, with the folks in this room, you want some concrete definitions. So let me introduce to you this framework, which is the BARC Data Culture Framework. If you haven't seen it before, it defines data culture with 6 components, which are data leadership, data governance, data strategy, access, literacy, and communication. Now you're looking at the slide going, great, I have 6 things to do and 6 things to worry about, right? How do I even think about where to start? And where would what do I prioritize? Because I've got a lot going on in my life, and so where should I start honing in? Let me tell you, my friends. Prioritize data communication and data literacy. Why is that? Because when you're building data culture starts with the people, right? And communication and technical silos are the reason that data culture doesn't exist, or where data culture goes to die, okay? When you have data communication and data literacy, a beautiful thing happens. And what does that beautiful thing look like? You start to see the fruits of your labor where the business is coming to you with better data questions. What does better data question look like? They're suddenly giving you better context as to why they're asking that data question, right? Instead of, what was the AOV last week? They're now giving you more context of, hey, we've seen an uptick in our sales, specifically in X product. Could you look into, potentially what are the products that are driving a higher AOV? And that helps you answer better business questions and giving them the right data instead of going through 15 iterations of something and delivering value faster, right? And that's when you're talking about, let me drive, value faster. How do I actually, make an impact? You know what people don't like? Having to explain to you 15 times over the answer they're actually looking for. How about you get to it the first time? Fantastic. So how do you get started, right? You're like, great, I'm sold. How do I get started? Well, you get started by becoming business literate, right? Speak the business's language. When we say metrics, right, there's so many metrics. It's a sea of metrics. So what's really important is that you start to speak to the metrics that matter to the business stakeholder that you're talking to. And with that, I'll let Sam take you away in terms of how you get there.
So in order to get there, we'll want to be able to leverage AI. And specifically, what we can do is use it to pinpoint and hypothesize the metrics that are important and can drive the most impact in the business. So before ChatGPT, a situation we may have all found ourselves in, I know myself in switching into data, a little more than 2.5 years ago, was being tasked with, doing an analysis, giving a dashboard, and not necessarily having a lot of context around that. And so needing to resort to Google and doing Google searches to get those answers. What should I be thinking about? What metrics should I prioritize as being important to an e-commerce industry? But with that Google search, you'll find that a third of your content that is returned to you is sponsored, which is not as helpful, or the 5 to 10 articles that you're parsing through, you have to go through the multiple to validate and go through multiple sources to make sure that the answers that you're getting are actually what it is that are going to be helpful when you're talking to business leaders. So what you might find is that 1 hour later you've done this search and you're still pulling your hair out. You might have gone down this really big rabbit hole and you start opening up multiple tabs on your computer. And if we're being honest, this is probably a small number of tabs compared to what you might actually have been doing in this rabbit hole of search. And with all of that, you still haven't found those summarized talking points that you need to go back to business stakeholders. And when you finally do, there's still a lot of frustration because those points that the business were looking for weren't found in your search. And so what that workflow might look like today and how maybe you're all spending your time is a lot of it is spent on data, and then you're spending a little bit of time on metrics, and then very little time on why it matters to the business. Maybe 75 to 85% of your time is spent wrangling the data, figuring out what data sources you need, validating that those data sources are of quality, and then you're transforming that data and solving for metrics, but you're focused on the calculation, you're focused on the individual number, but you're not necessarily thinking about the last component to it, which is why it matters. And because of this, you're going to your meetings and you'll find that there's a lot of frustration on both ends, because on your side, as a data practitioner, you've put in a lot of work that nobody's understanding. You spent all this time and nobody is listening to you. And on the business's side, there's a lot of frustration because they didn't actually get what it was that they were looking for. And so today, what I'm going to share is how you can get your workflow to look a little bit more like this, which is a little bit more of this continuous iterative approach where you're going through the data metrics and why it matters in a faster time to insight and a faster way, so that the business has more opportunity to provide those inputs. And because the business is getting that opportunity to provide inputs, they'll start to see and recognize you as someone who is connecting the dots and understanding how to work with data a little bit more strategically. And because they're seeing you as someone who can work with data strategically, this is where trust gets to be fostered. They'll rely on you as someone who understands why it matters to the business, because they recognize that you're someone who's not just thinking about the numbers, you're not just thinking about the calculation of a metric, but you're really thinking about how the data is enabling that metric and enabling the strategic decisions that are being made. So how that can be made faster is with ChatGPT. So for this example, maybe you're a new data analyst. Maybe you're new to the wellness e-commerce industry. Maybe you're new to actually owning the data stack for the first time, and you're the one who's controlling the decisions around what metrics are being done, what tools are being used, and not exactly sure where to start. And so you can use ChatGPT, go in and say, hey, I'm a new data analyst. I work in the wellness e-commerce space. What are some key KPIs that I need to learn? Give me some context that I can use to go talk to business stakeholders, and where are some common data sources that I should be aware of? And from ChatGPT, what's nice is that you'll get your generated list of answers, but it'll give you more than just what it is that you ask that you may not have thought to ask initially. It'll give you the definition to the metric. And we all know that businesses love to use like workplace jargon and acronyms, and no one ever really knows what they mean. But what's nice is that with ChatGPT, it'll give you something like average order value. It'll tell you what the acronym is. And so when you hear these in your meetings, you'll be able to follow along and be on the same page as everyone. It'll tell you the common sources that you might want to use to leverage, and it might even prompt you to think about questions that you want to ask depending on your initial prompt. Like an example for AOV, it might prompt you to go back to the business and ask what strategies are being implemented to help increase AOV. So now that you have this maybe 10 plus list of metrics, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I prioritize them? I'm new to this. And maybe there's time constraints and you don't know where the best place to start is. And that's where, again, you can leverage ChatGPT as a prioritization tool. You can ask what the top 3 to 5 metrics are, and for additional context, who it is that you can go to within the business. And you'll get your answer from ChatGPT, but I think what really sets it apart from maybe what you'd find in a Google search is that ChatGPT will caveat that the list that it's providing you is based on what is common ground and what might be common for an e-commerce objective, but you should go back to your business to validate those priorities, and it'll give you talking points to be able to do that. So, in this case, it ranked average order value as second, a priority that you might want to focus on, and then it'll tell you why, which is really important. So that way, when you have these conversations, you know why it's a priority. In this case, being able to help generate revenue and help with profitability. And then in order to go speak to different stakeholders, it'll let you know, hey, you can go talk to your sales team or you can go talk to your marketing team, and it'll give you questions that you can ask. It'll give you talking points to have very specifically. So if you want to go figure out how AOV is helping, with upsell, cross-sell strategies, or how it's helping with how discount decisions are being made across the business, ChatGPT will help give you those kind of talking points that you need to go talk to them, and even ideas around what those talking points should be. So now that you have this long list of metrics, you've prioritized them, you have a few context around why they matter, it's time to really start thinking about how to validate these hypotheses with different stakeholders and then build that trust along the way. So while ChatGPT can't do that verification for you, it can help you go back to business stakeholders with specific questions and with specific talking points. So instead of going from a very general, hey, tell me about your business, you start to get better guidance around what you should be asking, what you should be talking about, and you'll find that the conversations that you're having are a lot more fruitful and they're a lot more productive than maybe what you would have found prior. And I think what's really neat about ChatGPT, again, that I think really sets it apart from that Google search, is that it's telling you how to think about these. So I think before I mentioned, we were talking about how metrics are really spent thinking about the numbers and the calculation, but ChatGPT is there to help remind you that you also want to think about the narrative behind those metrics and how you should be talking about them. And it won't just tell you that, it'll go one step further and tell you what that narrative could look like and what you could go back to business stakeholders and talk about. Whether that's what external factors could be influencing this, what challenges might the business be facing in order to improve these metrics. And as a result, now you're really informed about the business. You've now kind of developed this comprehensive understanding of the data sources that you need, the metrics and their definitions, who are the impacted business functions that you might want to go and talk to. And all of this is done in a lot faster of a time than maybe you would have done in a Google search. So that like hour long you were spending before, like pulling out your hair, all these tabs that might have crashed your computer, you're now just using ChatGPT to consolidate those points. You've gotten through and gotten the answers that you need a little bit faster, and you're ready to start acting like a business owner, not just an owner of the data stack.
All right. Act like the owner of the business, not just the data stack. Let that sink in for a moment. How many of you out there think that you're probably closer to this, that you're thinking like a business owner already? That's fantastic. I mean, that's great. I mean, number one, kudos to you because you're already in that lane of driving value and impact at your business, right? Because you're probably the one that people are going to when there's an initiative change, right? And they're going to you and going, hey, how does that impact the data, right? And how does that impact our dashboards and metrics? And you've started to create that feedback loop. Now, for those of you who I want to be like that, right? I want to be thinking and acting like a business owner because right now I'm thinking about my data stack. Come along with me. Oops. So follow along with me on this from left to right. On the data side of things, you're probably crushing it, right? This is where you stuffed all your data in, you're wrangling it, doing all the amazing things that you're being taught, and you got this. The metrics layer is where, either you learn something from Sam today of like how to dig into it in a different way and save you time to get there faster, or you're also crushing this layer. I know what metrics are, pertaining to my business. Now, the acting like a business owner or thinking like a business owner, that's where it's the why, right? Why does this matter to your business? When you get to the why does it matter to your business, that's when you start thinking at a different level of when you think about the data that you're curating to get to that metric, what does that metric eventually drive for this company that you're working for, right? Take the wellness, e-com company that we've been using as an example in ChatGPT where you're going through and you're searching, you're validating, fantastic, I'm doing all these things, now what? Well, in that wellness company, let's pretend that in your conversations, as you're validating what's going on in the business, you discover that when you look at the P&L, profit and loss statement, that your D2C channel, your direct-to-consumer channel, is driving 60% of revenue, right? That's a majority, according to my math definition, of what's driving revenue at the company, right? And so now let's pretend that your D2C channel owner is coming to you and asking you, hey, can you dig into the latest trends for our AOV and conversion rate on our website? And simultaneously, your Amazon channel owner is also coming to you. Can you dig into the AOV of my channel and my conversion rates and my buy box, et cetera? What do? This is the day, this is our lives, right? Where everyone's coming to you and asking you for these data points. And what do? Well, based on why it matters, you've now learned how to prioritize, right? Sorry, Amazon business channel owner, I know you're gonna be upset at me, but all the talks that you've been listening to where it's, where's the bang worth your buck, right? Where are you spending your time, your brain, and your energy or your team's time on? It has to be aligned with what is driving your top line. And not just your top line, but what is the biggest part of that pie chart of what's driving your business. If you don't know what the biggest part of what is driving revenue significantly or majority of what's driving revenue in your business, I challenge you to go figure that out, right, in this validation process. Because if you don't know that, then it starts to trickle down backwards, right, into, well, how am I supposed to spend my time? What metrics are important? I have all this data, but I have no impact, right? Because what good is data if no one's using it and you did all this work? Fantastic, Celina. I figured out exactly how to prioritize. I know exactly what's driving my business. Am I done? Absolutely not. Why? Because once you got that data, once you got the metrics and you're like, great, this is why it matters to my business because a large percent of my business is driven by, our D2C channel, For those of you, and many of you who work at a startup, your priorities probably changed in the moments that you were sitting here, or in the moments that you've been at this conference, right? And how do you then stay in this feedback loop of, but what matters to my business now? And so some of the things that Sam talked about, right, where even earlier talks I talked about, make sure you're plugging into those business reviews. Make sure you're plugging into the planning cycle. Guess what? Make sure those one-on-one conversations you just had to validate some of those metrics are recurring. Because what I promise you is that even though it's not a technical thing, it's something that's gonna put so much more value on the technical things you do. Because in those one-on-one conversations is where you start to learn, oh, something changed about the business, or there's a new initiative. And how does that then go back to my data layer? And how does that then go back to changing different metrics of what matters to the business in that moment, right? And the beautiful thing that happens from those one-on-one conversations, and I've seen this firsthand, and for those of you who are thinking like the business owner, this is probably what's happening to you too, is that when you start to create those relationships with your stakeholders, guess what they do? They start to think of you, right? When things change, they're like, let me go back to the data team, or let me go back to Celina because we were just having this conversation and she's pulling this data for me, or they built this dashboard and something's gonna potentially change here. And so now you've created a feedback loop where the business is coming to you because they've become more data literate about what you're doing and giving you feedback so that you're not the last to know, right? You're not the last person in the room or at your company to know that something is changing. And now you've learned to anticipate what you need to do to the data to get to the parts of why it matters to the business, right? Because we all know that even if something changes, you're not going to be able to turn around that data work in a day, right? They're going to need that. So how do you learn from those conversations to anticipate that question is coming your way? And with that, just summarizing the 3 key takeaways that are tactical, right? That you could walk out of this room with, whether it's for you or someone potentially more junior on your team, right? 1, how do you dig in and leverage what we got today and what's sitting in front of us, right? Whether it's ChatGPT or other tools that you're going out there and using, and how do you hone in and pinpoint the key metrics and what matters to your business? The second part is, of course, validate, validate, validate. Go and talk to your business stakeholders and please validate, what is the priority here? And have that consistent conversation because that will change. And last but not least, shifting yourself into that mindset of how do I think and act like the business owner, not just the data stack, right? Because when you do all of this, this is how you're starting to drive that momentum of data communication, literacy. And when we say literacy, I don't just mean data literacy from the business stakeholder. It's also your business literacy, speaking the business's language, right? And ultimately, driving towards data culture and those 6 components I showed you earlier in the framework. And with that, if you'd like to practice data culture or have folks on your team that could benefit from the process that we just walked through, or you have additional questions, we'd love to chat and connect. And thank you for being here.